Good afternoon. This is Critical Talk with Professor Amin Al-Din. Critical Talk is a production of Muslim Network TV, and I want to welcome all of you to this afternoon's program. We are all getting the political heebie-jeebies. We're not sure if we know enough. What we do know is things we've heard about the Supreme Court. That's an issue. I mean, everything's an issue. What can I say? We have issues about what is the history that we need to be aware of to have some informed thoughts about what is going on. So I thought that today we would spend a little time with Anthony Simpkins, who has his law degree and political science, master's in political science, uh, Loyola University in Chicago. He has had an extensive legal career and is currently, our deputy commissioner for housing in the city of Chicago. But we're not talking about housing today. We're focusing on political science. And since you're a past president of the Muslim Bar Association and are a judge in I guess we call it Chicago land, we're going to tackle some other pertinent issues today. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Professor Al-Din. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and happy to contribute whatever I can.
Oh, this will be a lot because many of these questions I have no clue as to what the answer is. So we're the political system today has become so polarized, it seems. And it may be that it's really not. It may be that it always has been. But we're a two-party system with a third party that keeps trying to get, or a fourth that keep trying to get in there but can't go anywhere because people stick with habits. But there's the one divide that is noticeable, and I think it became most noticeable with President Obama, was you have a president that's from one party and a Congress where the majority of the members are from another party, and a Supreme Court which is now politicized. Help us out a little bit with all of these systems that we thought we knew, but apparently we don't know.
Sure. I think, part of the conversation that has been occurring in the political sphere for the last few years is, this discussion about the polarization of our political system, especially when it comes to the federal system, Congress and the president, the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, but we also see it on the state level too, as well, and sometimes even on the local level. This idea of divided government is something that is particularly part of this concept of a polarized government and really a polarized country to a certain extent, and we'll talk about that in a second. But when it comes to the government, the Congress, this idea of a divided government is where one party holds the presidency and generally in the Senate, like we have now. The Republicans hold the presidency and they have a majority in the Senate, and then the other party then holds the majority in the House. And that's generally what we talk about when we say we have a divided government. This is not the first time that we've had a divided government. Okay. We've had a divided government just like this in the past. The 98th Congress, which was the Congress that was in place when Ronald Reagan was the president. had exactly the same thing. The Republicans had the presidency, and they had about a 10-member majority in the Senate. But the Democrats had about a 103-member majority in the House of Representatives. So
Okay.
that was an era of divided government. However, despite the fact that they had divided government, there was quite a bit of bipartisanship when it came to moving legislation and national policy. That was the Congress that made Martin Luther King's birthday a national holiday. They passed Social Security reforms. They passed one of the first criminal justice omnibus reform bills.
Mm.
They passed legislation that dealt with the budget deficit, raised taxes, and cut spending. There was even an effort to do some immigration reform.
Mm.
So, despite the fact that you had divided government, Congress was able to work on a bipartisan basis in many instances. And, Glass-Steagall, I mean, we've got examples of some significant historical legislation that was really McCain-Feingold is a perfect example, which was a bill that was sponsored by these two major, one Republican, McCain, and one Democrat, Feingold, that came together and sponsored this comprehensive reform legislation. So divided government does not necessarily mean government that's dysfunctional. However, things changed when you get to the 112th Congress, which is the Congress when Barack Obama was the president.
Mm-hmm.
You had the same thing, right? Once the Republicans swept the 2010 midterms, the Democrats held 53 to 47 majority in the Senate, but the Republicans swept through the House and had a 49 seat majority in the House. So once again, you had divided government. The Democrats now had the presidency and the Senate, and the Republicans had the House. It was
Let
really
me ask you a question. So when we think about divided, it doesn't mean at odds necessarily. It means this over here, that over there. But isn't there a principle or something that says even though one party may have the majority one place or the other, that they're supposed to work together to negotiate bills? My second question is, how come the Senate gets to determine whether stuff actually gets passed along to the president's office? Because we have in Mitch McConnell and perhaps some former, people in his position, this ability to say, oh no, I'm not even going to bring this up for a vote. Oh no, I'm going to stop this dead in its tracks. What's going on there?
So, and I think that was sort of the point, that this is not the first time that we've had divided government. This is probably the first time that we've seen this kind of intense political polarization, especially ideological polarization along our two-party system that has gone along with a divided government. We have a bicameral system. We have two houses of the legislature, and both houses have to pass on a piece of legislation. Normally, the House will pass a piece of legislation. The Senate will usually pass a different version, and then you have a conference committee that gets together and melds the two together into something that both houses can agree on. The leadership in both houses can agree on, and that's what goes to the president. What you have now, and this really started, we talked about the Reagan administration being in power during a period of divided government. But it was really there at that point that what you started to see was this term Reagan Democrats.
Right.
What you started to see was the ideological split. I mean, sort of the silent majority concept that was started really during Nixon's era.
Right.
You had the contract with America with Newt Gingrich, and you began to see the ascendance of this a strong political ascendance of conservatives. At the same time, you had many sort of conservative, if you will, Democratic legislators and voting districts that went over to the Republican side. These were really conservative Democratic, especially in the South. You had this ideological. You now have this really strong ideological shift, split between the parties, and you also have party bases, the party loyalists, who actually punish their representatives for compromise at this point, right? That's where the Tea Party came from, right? The Tea Party came from, we don't want to compromise with the Democrats on these issues at all.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, a couple of minutes. You are welcome to get some coffee or some tea or some water, but I want to come back and see if we can clarify some terms. When we say conservative, what issues are we talking about? Liberal and people who are middle of the road. Let's take a couple of minute break. This is Professor Amina Al-Din with Critical Talk, a program of Muslim Network TV, and we'll be right back.
Boards are popping up all over the country with an...
Our neighbors don't realize that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
16 shots! No peace! No justice! No peace!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world? You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward.
That lesson learned brought the strength of humanity to America, which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
Welcome back, Professor Amina Al-Din, who has the pleasure of speaking with Attorney Anthony Naeem Simpkins, and I should say Judge Simpkins. I don't want to be remiss. And we're on Critical Talk, talking about our we're thinking about our political future by visiting a little bit of the past, which is pertinent here. And one of the questions I asked before we took a little break was about conservative, liberal. Have those terms really lost their currency? What are we talking about when we talk about conservative and liberal and moderate?
You know, and I think, again, starting probably with the Reagan era, this idea of a conservative has really taken on a significance that it maybe didn't have before. You know, as I said, you know, as far back as Nixon, he talked about sort of the silent majority. But that was really about sort of the majority of people in the country. But Reagan really brought in an ascendancy. I mean, the conservative movement sort of holds Reagan up as their hero.
Conservative about what?
Well, that's an interesting question. You know, it really started with what was called the Southern Strategy, where you had people who were considered conservative, if you will, on some of our you know, stickier racial issues like affirmative action and civil rights and stuff like that, because of, you know, some of the political legacies of the South.
Right.
You began to wrap into that. It was really when Newt Gingrich and that group came along that there was a concerted effort then to wrap in cultural issues into the mix. You may remember terms like accusing Democrats of being cultural elites. So
I
these
do.
quote unquote cultural issues, what they call cultural issues, abortion and prayer in school, that fed off of the issues that really ran many of the conservatives out of the Democratic Party into the Republican Party. And those are really more race-based issues like school busing and stuff like that. And so you began to get this ideological divide, and this concept of conservatism now is very much wrapped into religious conservatism, right?
Right.
Sort of that fundamental Christian concept is very much tied to this concept of conservatism. That's why issues like abortion and gay marriage and stuff like that really create that divide between the two ideologies.
Gotcha. I want to move along to talk about the Supreme Court. We've had courts, and it's interesting. The Supreme Court works harder now than it seems like it's ever done in its life. It's hearing more cases, and they got a job for life and make good money, but I don't think they thought they would have to work this hard. But anyway, so we've always seen the court kind of polarized in the same way, and because the court has to have an odd number of judges. It's always been either a largely conservative court or a liberal court. With the death of one court member, everything goes up in the air. This justice, a woman who was a trailblazer, you really, and I'm sure that you could if you looked hard and wide, but she had such a lifelong history of trailblazing that would be difficult. But what is nominated and probably will be confirmed is a judge who is very conservative, the opposite of Ginsburg, right? But who also brings to the court notions that Christianity is the law of the land, and a particular kind of Christianity. And what will happen now when the angst of people in other religious traditions come to the court?
So in this interplay in divided government and this polarization between conservatives and liberals, which are really broad concepts, but the Supreme Court has actually played a pretty central role in this. And the sort of politicization of the Supreme Court has really taken some saliency. And you're right. I mean, right now what we have is we've had for a while sort of a 5-4 split between the conservatives and the liberals on the court, with Roberts, Alito, Gorsuch, Thomas, and Kavanaugh sort of being the conservatives, and Sotomayor, Breyer, Kagan, and until she passed away,
Ruth Bader
Ginsburg being sort of the liberal. And so you had a lot of 5-4 decisions. It's interesting that, and see, here again is how you see the ascendancy of this conservative liberal split. Justice Roberts, who was appointed by a Republican president and was appointed as a conservative judge, has actually turned out to be a swing vote in many instances.
Right.
Right. I mean, he essentially upheld the ACA and the mandate under the ACA. He was part of the court decision, the majority that struck down the Louisiana abortion law. So he's been a swing vote on a number of cases. But what you have is once Amy Coney Barrett, who is a judge that wrote an opinion on the Seventh Circuit that basically said somebody being called the N-word at work did not necessarily create a hostile work environment. So that's the perspective that she's coming from, and has made it very clear that she intends to continue the legacy of Anton Scalia, who, except for Clarence Thomas, who honestly is well, let's just say that Anton Scalia is quoted as of once saying that he's a conservative, but he's not a nut like Clarence Thomas. So that's how sort of on the fringe Clarence Thomas is when it comes to his conservatism.
He's a placeholder.
He's something. But yes. So, and what does that mean? One of the things that Coney Barrett talked about in her confirmation hearings was that, she was a literalist, meaning that she reads the Constitution based upon what the words actually say and what the original intent was of the drafters of the Constitution. She also says that courts are not supposed to be policymakers, which, as a student of political science, I always find that to be really a laughable statement. Courts make policy all the time. That's what they do. They are the third branch of government. Right. They make policy all the time. So when you're talking about now what would be really a 6-3 conservative, for the most part, conservative liberal split on the court, the U.S. Supreme Court, with 6 members being in the conservative wing and 3 members being in the liberal wing, that basically means that the conservatives now have stacked the court. They run the court. Right. And so when it comes to real critical issues, everybody's sort of focused on the ACA right now, the Affordable Care Act, and whether that will survive in Roe versus Wade. But there are critical issues when it comes to voting rights, when it comes to affirmative action, gerrymandering, the rights of workers. There are lots of very critical issues. Just the whole concept of whether there's a right to privacy, which is really salient in this new era of technology, ever evolving technology, and what does a right to privacy mean in this ever evolving atmosphere of technology. So they're real critical issues that this court is going to pass on, and justices on the Supreme Court, like all federal judges, sit for lifetime appointment. And so we're talking about
unless we change it,
which is one of the issues that people are talking about to some extent. I wish they were talking about it more. I personally don't understand why a federal judge, whether on the Supreme Court or whether they're a magistrate judge, should have a lifetime appointment. Most state court judges do not have. Well, no, I can't think of any state court judges that have lifetime appointments. Whether you're talking about a state Supreme Court or whether you're talking about, just a regular associate trial judge, they have to run. Our state Supreme Court sits for 10 years and then they run.
Well, I think all of that is crazy. I want to move along. So where are we with these current national protests against police violence? One hand, self-proclaimed socialist Democrats on the other, and maybe in between, I'm not sure if it's in between or if it's just a third prong of the militia movements. When we come back, we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to let you think about all of that. I'm going to take a sip of water. This is Professor Amin Dean speaking with Judge Anthony Naim Simpkins, and we're thinking about our political future. We'll be right back.
Assalamu alaikum!
I love Adam's World because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's World because it makes me happy. What? No. And here's Adam and he's Anissa. Adam is and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is really smart.
Download the new Adams World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
Welcome back to Professor Amina Al-Din and Judge Anthony Naeem Simpkins, thinking about our political future on Critical Talk from Muslim Network TV. I left you thinking about national protests, I don't know, democratic socialists, militias, but I want to interject something. You know, it's interesting to me that if the Republicans in their primary had come up with a formidable, amiable candidate who knew what the word truth was, some people might have voted for him.
Mm.
You know, but since they continued with the person who is in office, which I guess is a part of a tradition, we're lined up. And in some ways, some people have mentioned, we can't even see if what the Trump administration, is there anything good they have done? Because they fomented so much polarization, so much violence, etc. So let's go and talk about these current national protests.
So, this is a really excellent question. In two regards. I think number one, we just got off this issue of polarization. And I think there's not only polarization between the two parties, but I also think there's some polarization within the parties that we can talk about a little bit.
Right.
But with regard to the national protests, we're at a point now, and I suppose we were at a similar point in the 60s where you really have a groundswell that's speaking out against some of the systemic injustices and imbalance in our nation. But one of the things that's important, well, there are two things that's important. I think number one is that hopefully what we have is we have a set of young people who have always been the vanguard of social justice movements in our nation from the very founding until now. So kudos to our young people who are really out there fighting the fight, right? I mean, just really not just energetic, but smart, right? These are intellectuals that are out there understanding what the issues are. But hopefully, I also hope that they are also aware enough to understand that the protests on the street, as critically important as they are highlighting issues and demanding a seat at the table, voting in our system is also absolutely critical. You want to reform the criminal justice system, one of the most important things you can do is actually sit on the juries that decide whether police officers that have murdered people are going to be accountable, or are going to treat black and white defendants the same. Well, you can't be on the jury unless you're on the voter rolls, right? You want to hold our politicians accountable. One of the best ways to hold them accountable is to vote them out of office if they are not responsive to the needs of their constituents. So you need both. Right? You need the protest and you need the activism, but you also need to exercise voting. I think the other thing is that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was thinking about that. And in the Muslim community, there are some counters. And they're wondering who one makes alliances with. You know, I'm listening kind of in the background to some of the imams talking. I agree with you that the young people seem to have a mind of their own. And on top of that, they're thinking about issues in critical ways, which is important. They're not letting climate concerns go by the wayside. You know, they are aware of the fact that DeVos didn't give student loans a pass. You know, I mean, there are many things that some of us who've been through that have forgotten about, that young people are paying just focused attention to.
You know, one of the things that I'm hoping also, because if you think about the issues, climate change and student loan debt, criminal justice system, these are not issues that are just issues for Black and brown people.
Exactly.
And you know, right after the Civil War, there was a brief magical period where what you really had was you had poor and working class whites who were building coalitions with the African Americans and the ex-slaves. Right? This is a powerful grassroots progressive coalition.
Right.
But what you have now is you have many working class whites and some Hispanics who see themselves as at odds with you know, their counterparts in the Black and brown community, and many people in the progressive community. And that is really a purposeful intent to drive a wedge through what could really be a massive coalition that could really demand some fundamental changes, some real fundamental changes to our system. But, you know, I think that on both sides, but especially on the progressive side, I had a conversation with my daughter the other day, and my question to her was, and this would be my question to you and to the audience, is the progressive movement making their tent too small? I know that you know, the progressive movement, the social democrat, the Justice Democrats, for instance, are making a concerted effort to move the Democratic Party farther to the left, which I think is a good thing. They've spent many years sort of remaining in the center, trying to go after these quote unquote Reagan Democrats, who are really just conservatives, when there's millions and millions of disaffected liberals and would-be Democrats that they should be going after. And then they could control a House, a Senate, and a presidency. But I think in the move to the left and the ascendancy of the Democratic Socialists and the progressive movement, is there room in the movement for Democrats and liberals who don't embrace gay marriage or are against abortion because of their faith traditions, or African Americans and Hispanics and traditional liberals and Democrats, union members who are gun owners and hunters and are against additional restrictions on gun ownership, for instance, right? How big is their tent? Are they boxing out people who could, in fact, be their allies? I think what you find on the conservative side is people often disagree on many of the issues, but come together to coalesce around an issue like abortion, or an issue like prayer in school, or something like that, right? They can set aside the fact that they may have differences. They may have differences on economic issues, but coalesce around social issues, or vice versa.
Well, no, I would agree that I think that the tent is very small. And I think it's a reaction to the thrust, the violence of the thrust of the other tent. And you really have to think things through. You can't decide that you're going to kill all the horses in the barn because you only like one. You know, there has to be room for people to, I want to say non-violently, but that's not appropriate, to reasonably disagree and have a space in the country too. And I really think it's a reaction to the violent thrust of the other tent. But when we're looking at the legislative portions of that, you can jump up and down, and all of us have done this before, and protest, but we also know that there's not only a need for law, there's a need for enforceable law, right? And I don't know that that's been thoroughly worked out, and maybe that it takes some time. I don't know. But moving right along, and on the light of current calls to reform, or even completely restructure our criminal justice system? Are there considerations of how we might want to change the fundamental aspects of current political and government system, the political and government system in America? And that's kind of what we're talking about, because it is, one group of people who are always left out of conversations are First Nations. Who we continue to keep on reservations through both Democratic and Republican conversations. We have not revisited treaties, except for in Tulsa, in any reasonable way. So we're faced with a pandemic, and then we have reservations with no water, so the hand washing, no access to hand sanitizers, etc. Little colonies of COVID, and when we talk about government and other kinds of political systems, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me like we have put our glue in a two-party system, come hell or high water.
Well, that's interesting that you ask about sort of restructuring of our system. So we know, for instance, that there are these calls for, the catchphrase right now has been defunding the police, but it's really about restructuring how police departments operate,
right,
and how we allocate resources to deal with some of the social issues that the police are often dispatched to deal with, and they're really perhaps not the appropriate arm of government to deal with those social issues. But even deeper than that, when you have folks like AOC and the Justice Democrats are actually threatening to run candidates against some of the more middle of the road Democrats, and are making a concerted effort to force the party to really live up to the ideals of the Democratic Party. I mean, if we want to talk honestly about this, I mean, here's an example. Barack Obama, we're talking about Justice Amy Coney Barrett is going to be nominated because
nominated,
confirmed because Republicans have control over the Senate. Now, we had the same situation, and essentially Mitch McConnell wouldn't allow Barack Obama to make an appointment. Now, how does that happen? Is the president more powerful, or is the head of the Senate more powerful, right?
It seems like the head of the Senate.
So here's something that Barack Obama could have done, which I could definitely see our current president doing, which is to say, well, I'm appointing him anyway.
Yeah.
You can advise or consent if you want, if you want, or you don't want, but I have the constitutional right to appoint him, and I'm going to appoint him and, create some kind of constitutional crisis. Well, that's something that Donald Trump would have done. That's essentially what Mitch McConnell did. So why weren't the Democrats as aggressive as the Republicans are now, right?
Well, it might be that you're thinking that the Democrats are terribly different than the Republicans.
And that's my point, right? At the end of the day, I mean, I hate to be blunt here, but at the end of the day, what you're talking about is essentially, for the most part, a group, whether you're talking about Democrats or Republicans in Congress, you're talking about essentially a bunch of rich white people. Exactly. And at the end of the day, whether you or I have health care, they're still going to have theirs, right? They're still going to get, their long-term capital gains treatment in the tax code, and their passive income treatment in the tax code.
And their children.
Yes, exactly. And whether the Supreme Court is striking down affirmative action or not, their kids are still going to get into Stanford and Harvard. Right. So there isn't a lot of incentive for them to fight that hard for stuff that really doesn't affect them much at all.
Why they need state politics become so important. If you're electing people who don't have your best interest, however it is you see it at heart, then you need to reconsider. Don't just keep re-electing people like they do here in Chicago, you know, and some of those people are gonna die. They're just gonna find them one day with cobwebs around them in their chair. You know, I mean, it's an ongoing, interesting thing. For our last few moments, I want to take us to foreign policy challenges. There's been some rumors, how true they are, I don't know, that Russia put in some fake ballot boxes that already got ballots in them. We got militia inside of polling places, intimidating people. They've got people not, and I saw this on TV today, not being permitted into polling places if they have on Black Lives Matter t-shirts. So I guess if they're black, that means Black Lives Matter too. And you're people are trying to keep them out of polling places.
Wow.
So what is our foreign policy thing? We don't want stuff from China, but China makes darn near everything we use. Russia is hacking its, you know, I mean, if there was a Hershey bar for every hack Russia makes, they'd be drowning in chocolate. We have climate accords. We have Israel issues. We have Guantanamo issues. Guantanamo is still sitting there, and it's still got people in it. We have Iranian issues. I heard that there was a suit allowed to proceed against Google. We have international trade issues. Take your pick.
Yeah, well, the next president is certainly going to have their hands full. I mean, obviously, I think what you have is you have a set of moral issues, a set of economic issues, and a set of strategic issues when it comes to foreign policy. You know, you say China is probably a big deal. The United States has been the largest economy outside of, I guess, the European Union, which seems to be falling apart at this point.
Yeah.
Outside of the European Union in the world, China and to some extent India as well are actually now rivaling the United States as the largest economies in the world. What does that mean? That means that China, and you already see the influence that China is having as the largest, and this used to be America's role as the largest economy in the world, the influence that they are having on things as simple as, and this was the pushback with TikTok and stuff, right?
Right.
Just their influence on what you can access on the internet.
Right.
What movies look like, right? Because now China is a bigger market for Hollywood than the United States is. So if China says, we don't like to see these kinds of things in our movies, they're not going to be in our movies anymore. So, I mean, that's probably our biggest foreign policy issue is, what is our position on the world stage as it pertains to being the largest economic power? We're still one of the largest military powers, but China's military is actually larger than ours.
Well, are we still the largest economic power as the Trump administration has pulled us back from accords, from councils, from this, from that, and the other? And as we pursue an isolationist policy, can we still make some of the claims that we were making before?
You know, that's interesting. I think right now we can, and that's why the job of the next president is going to be critical, because when you have an economic power like China that's growing and growing aggressively, you've got India, you've got Russia, America can't retreat and retrench, or else we will in fact lose the ascendant position that we have in the world right now. And that has all kinds of implications, not just for the United States economically, but for the United States politically and strategically as well, because it is our economic and our military might that gives us the kind of influence that we have around the world. Now, there's also a moral influence, which is a different story. And I think that the United States moral authority has been critically eroded, certainly by Donald Trump. But I mean, you mentioned Guantanamo, and there's some other issues that have also eroded, I think, our moral authority. I don't think we've had a president that you could point to as sort of a moral authority in the world, probably since Jimmy Carter. And so that's something we really need to consider, I think.
So we're sitting here claiming to be the superpower, and we keep our power and influence by, if you don't like it, we'll shoot you.
Or, you know, we'll put in a economic sanctions, or we won't sell our products to you, or we won't buy your products. So, I mean, economic authority is critically important, especially in a world that is so economically integrated, right? When we had our economic crisis, our foreclosure crisis, that reverberated around the entire world.
Yeah.
So many of them held our mortgage-backed securities and our other debt instruments. So we're economically integrated with the rest of the world, but can we maintain the position as top dog when you've got an ascendant China on the horizon? That's interesting.
Well, I mean, do you think that, I mean, China is spreading itself the same way America did in the past globally. And it is moving in almost in the same way, building schools, building roads, building highways and bridges in almost every country in Africa that I can think of, you know, providing computers here and there. India is not quite doing the same thing, although India has been known for creating this middle class of people so that Europeans didn't have to be present, for the natives to be kept under thumb. That's a kind of different approach. But in terms of numbers of people, we're very tiny on the scale of anything.
Yep.
And the way we've kept our power has been through guns and weapons of mass destruction and upholding tyrants in other places, you know, to kind of work our will through them. That's a horrible future.
Well, that has been the legacy of many empires. You know, you obtain land and markets through military force, and then you install governors, either from your own people or native folks, to then govern the territories over which you hold sway. I mean, that is sort of been, you know, we're in a sort of post-colonial, post-Westphalian, you know, phase now. So that's not supposed to be how we operate.
Well,
right?
It's not post-colonial. It's still colonial. You know, it's just a nice to stick the tag of a post on something like post-racial for a moment, you know, and that just lets you get a rest so you can get your ante up again. But let me do this. Let me give you, Judge, the last few minutes and tell us what is most important you think across any range of stuff you want to, that is important for us, for those who haven't gone to the polls to consider, for those of us who have gone to the polls and now will have insomnia till November 3rd to think about.
That's interesting. So, you know, our system is a representative democracy. So,
who said?
My civics teacher in high school said. So it must be true.
Okay.
But I mean, we have representative democracy. So polls and voting, I know I said this earlier, are really critically important. I mean, while you are working to, you know, tear down the system is still there. And there are ways that you can work through the system to make some things happen. Very interestingly, if you look at the Republicans and the conservatives, for many decades now, they have had a phenomenally successful strategy of taking over local governments. I mean, they started by running people for park district and school board,
right?
Right, to begin to put their folks in place,
right?
And police departments, and you know, whatever else you can vote for. Took over state legislators, and have really worked their way into being able to stack the courts, both federal and state courts, So they've been very smart about bit by bit gaining control of the levers of our system. And that's why people look around and say, this system really doesn't work for me. We have millions upon millions upon millions of people in this country who are right-minded people and are not engaged in our system and could have done the same thing. They could have run the school board, and run the local boards of trustees and city councils, and voted judges that they don't like out of office. I mean, they could have been doing this all along. And I'm just hoping that this new sort of progressive era that we see really gets these millions and millions and millions of people who have been missing from our system engaged in our system, because that will be the fundamental change to our system.
This is Professor Amina Al-Din. I have spent a wonderful time with Judge Anthony Naeem Simpkins on Critical Talk, which is a production of Muslim Network TV, and I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Professor. It's always fun.